a 5,000-year-old Sumerian tablet that names the three continents that won't survive the next shift. In 2019, a salvage excavation team working under Dr. Karim Haddad of the Iraqi State Board of Antiquities broke through a secondary floor layer at a site 8 kilometers southeast of ancient Nippur. They were looking for administrative records. Standard Ur 3-period accounting tablets, the kind that fill museum storage rooms by the thousands, grain tallies, livestock transfers, temple donations. What they found was a sealed ceramic container, roughly 40 centimeters across. Its lid had been fired separately and bonded to the body with a mixture of bitumen and powdered calcite. Inside, wrapped in what had once been textile, the fibers long gone, the mineral residue still visible, were 4 tablets. 3 were hymnal fragments, consistent with Nippur's long role as a primary religious center. The 4th was different. Its clay composition did not match local Nippur sources. The cuneiform on its face was older in style than the surrounding tablets, a deliberate archaism, the same scribal practice identified in other Sumerian documents that were copied from even earlier originals. A scribe writing in an older script signals one thing: the content is not mine. I am copying something that came before me. Dr. Haddad's team cataloged it as NPF-19, the Nippur predictive fragment, 19th registered find from that excavation season. NPF-19 measures 28 centimeters by 19 centimeters, thicker than standard administrative tablets, made to last, not to be recycled. Optically stimulated luminescence dating of the sediment surrounding the container placed the burial at approximately 2400 BCE. Script analysis by Dr. Marta Svensson of Uppsala University's Assyriology department suggested the original composition the scribe was copying from predates the surviving clay by between 800 and 1,600 years. That puts the original text at or before 3,200 BCE, among the earliest written records our civilization produced. The tablet does not describe a flood. It does not describe punishment or war or divine anger. It describes a physical event, and it names the places that will not survive it. 3 of them. In geographic terms specific enough that the researchers working from the translation have identified them with what Dr. Svensson's report calls reasonable confidence against the actual map of the world. 2 of those identifications place the named regions in areas where several hundred million people live today. What NPF-19 actually records. The first 4 columns of NPF-19 are a cosmological record. Mathematical cycles expressed in the Sumerian base 60 system, the same system that gives us 60 seconds in a minute. When decoded through the standard sexagesimal framework, those columns encode intervals that match the precession cycle of approximately 25,920 years and the obliquity cycle of approximately 41,000 years. Modern geophysicists call these the Milankovitch cycles, drivers of ice ages, mathematically described by Milutin Milankovitch in the early 20th century. NPF-19 appears to have known them roughly 5,000 years before that. It was known. Column 5 is where the document changes register. The first 4 columns record observation. Column 5 records determination. Dr. Svensson's team identified the opening phrase as a formal declaration used in other Sumerian texts to announce decisions by the Divine Assembly, the Anunnaki Council. It translates most directly as, "and it was established in the great house of knowing." What follows is a geographic reckoning. The tablet describes the coming event with a phrase that appears nowhere else in the surviving Sumerian corpus: the inversion of the deep anchor. Dr. Svensson's team spent 4 months on that phrase alone. The Sumerian roots combine 2 concepts: the magnetic orientation root, the same root used when describing a needle that finds north, with the reversal root, meaning a thing turning in the direction opposite to its nature. A geomagnetic pole. Reversal. That is what the phrase describes, not symbolically, technically. Modern geology calls it a reversal event. The paleomagnetic record, preserved in volcanic rock, shows it has happened hundreds of times in Earth's history. The last full reversal was 780,000 years ago. The last significant excursion, a partial collapse rather than a full reversal, was the Lachamp event, approximately 42,000 years ago, when the field dropped to roughly 6% of its current strength. Researchers publishing in Science in 2021 linked the Lachamp event to megafauna extinctions and the disappearance of the Neanderthals. Earth's magnetic field has lost approximately 9% of its strength over the last 170 years. The direction of that trend is not contested by anyone working in geophysics. The South Atlantic Anomaly, a region of severely weakened field over the southern Atlantic, has been expanding and deepening for decades. In 2020, data from the European Space Agency's Swarm satellite mission confirmed the anomaly had split into two distinct lobes. NPF-19 encodes an interval from what it calls the last great dimming, the same phrase other Sumerian texts use for the period preceding a catastrophic disruption, to a calculated endpoint. Researchers who have worked through the tablet's own mathematical framework place that endpoint within a window the document calls the turning age, a transition period it explicitly links to changes already visible in the sky. The three regions named in columns 6, 7, and 8 of NPF-19 are identified in sequence. The document describes them in a specific order and makes a specific claim about that order. The third region named is not the last to fail, it is the first, and its failure begins the sequence for the other two. Column 6 opens with a phrase that translates as, "And these are the lands the anchor abandons." The first region uses a compound geographic descriptor referencing the great water where the sun goes down, a consistent Sumerian expression for the Western Ocean, the Atlantic, combined with the term for low-lying lands at the edge of the world. The description specifies a coastal geography, flat land, many rivers, land sitting very close to the level of the sea, land that has survived, the text says, only because the anchor holds the waters against it. Dr. Svensson's team, working against a full corpus of Sumerian geographic references, identified the first region with high confidence as the northwestern coastal plain of Europe. The Netherlands, Belgium, significant portions of Denmark, northern Germany's coastline, the Thames estuary, the fenlands of eastern England, land that in several cases sits below current sea level and holds against the ocean through engineering. The mechanism NPF-19 describes for this region is not rainfall. The tablet says the anchor releases its hold on the waters of the deep. In modern terms, when the geomagnetic field collapses, ocean circulation destabilizes. The Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, AMOC, weakens and stops. Ocean levels in the North Atlantic rise not by centimeters, but by meters, as the current suppressing sea level along European coastlines fails. AMOC is already weakening. Measurements since 2004 show a decline in strength that sits outside the range of natural variability. A study published in Nature Climate Change in 2021 detected statistical signatures of potential critical instability, the kind that precedes a rapid transition to a significantly weaker state. The official scientific position is cautious about timelines. NPF-19 is not cautious. Subscribe if you are not already here. This channel goes where the peer-reviewed literature stops. The tablet's description of the first region ends with a line that has no parallel elsewhere in the Sumerian geographic corpus. It says the people of that land were warned before, that their own records carry the memory of a previous flooding from a previous anchor shift. The archaeological record of the North Sea Basin contains exactly this. Doggerland, the landmass that once connected Britain to continental Europe across what is now the southern North Sea, was flooded approximately 8,200 years ago during a period of significant climate disruption. Within a few centuries, it was under 40 meters of water. British and Dutch underwater archaeologists have recovered stone tools, wooden posts, and human remains from the seabed. The memory NPF-19 references is sitting on the floor of the North Sea right now, It has been there long enough that the people above it forgot it was there. The second named region. The second geographic descriptor in NPF 19 is the most specific of the three. The tablet uses the phrase, "the land of the thousand islands where the sun is born." In Sumerian astronomical vocabulary, the rising sun, born in the east, and the setting sun, dying in the west, are fixed orientations. The Eastern Ocean is well attested across multiple tablets. The Thousand Islands designation maps to one region without meaningful ambiguity. The Southeast Asian archipelago, encompassing what we now call Indonesia, the Philippines, and the island chains of Oceania. From a modern map, this region does not look obviously threatened. 17,000 islands across thousands of kilometers of ocean, most of them standing between 2 to 15 meters above current sea level. Many of them dense with population. Java alone holds more than 140 million people. The mechanism NPF 19 describes for the Thousand Islands is different from the first region. The tablet uses two distinct Sumerian root words for the two processes. For the western coastal lands, the word is closest to release, a slow unlocking. For the Thousand Islands, the word shares a root with the Sumerian terms for violent ground movement and for what their texts call the Great Mountain Breaking, their standard expression for volcanic eruption. The Southeast Asian archipelago sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire. The tectonic situation there is already the most active on Earth. The subduction zones around Indonesia, specifically the Sunda megathrust and the Java Trench, carry accumulated stresses that geophysicists describe as capable of producing the largest category of seismic events the planet generates. The 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake, a magnitude 9.1 event along the Sunda megathrust, released the energy equivalent to 23,000 atomic bombs and produced a tsunami that killed 227,000 people across 14 countries. The relationship between geomagnetic field instability and seismic and volcanic activity is not settled science. Several peer-reviewed studies published from 2017 to 2023 have found statistical correlations between periods of magnetic field weakness and elevated global seismic and volcanic activity. The mechanism is debated. The correlation itself in those studies is not. NPF 19 does not explain mechanisms. It records patterns. The Thousand Islands, it says, will be shaken from below in the time of the inversion, and the waters will fill what the shaking empties. The document's language here is the most precise of the three regions. It specifies the shaking comes first, then the filling. Earthquake-triggered tsunami. Written in clay in a city 5,000 years ago and left in a sealed container under a floor. The third named region, and why this is the one that made researchers go quiet. The third geographic descriptor is the shortest in language and the most disputed in identification. It reads, "The great southern land that holds the cold anchor." The cold anchor is not a unique Sumerian phrase. It appears in several other texts and consistently refers to a geographic feature of the far south, described as cold, distant, and important in ways the texts never fully develop. Two identifications have been proposed by the researchers who have worked through NPF 19. Antarctica and the southern cone of South America, Patagonia, and Tierra del Fuego, the southernmost inhabited land on Earth, which sits directly adjacent to the Drake Passage and the Antarctic Circumpolar Current. The case for Antarctica is not easy to dismiss. Several ancient maps, most notably the Peary Race map of 1513, appear to show the Antarctic coastline with accuracy that should not have existed at that date. The confirmed European discovery of Antarctica came more than 300 years later. The admiral himself, in his own marginal notes, stated he was compiling from older source documents whose origins he did not fully know. Whether those source documents connect to a tradition that includes NPF 19 is a question that has not been formally investigated. What the tablet says about the third region, whichever of the two identifications is correct, is the element that the preliminary translation report flags as the most significant claim in the entire document.
The Great Southern Cold Anchor does not fail last. It fails first. Its shift begins the sequence. The western coastal lands and the Thousand Islands experience their disruptions in the aftermath of what happens in the south. This is not the geographic sequence most modern projections describe. In current scientific modeling, the Atlantic coastal flooding risk is tied primarily to ice sheet collapse in Greenland, which sits in the north, not the south. NPF 9 says the sequence runs from south to north and south to east. The Great Southern Cold Anchor moves. Then the western waters release. Then the Thousand Islands shake. The West Antarctic Ice Sheet is losing mass faster than any model from a decade ago predicted. Ocean temperatures around Antarctica have been rising at rates that are destabilizing the ice shelves that act as land-based ice in place. If the West Antarctic Ice Sheet fully destabilizes, global sea levels rise by 5 meters. The Antarctic Circumpolar Current, the most powerful ocean current on Earth, regulating temperature across the entire southern hemisphere, has been accelerating since 2006, documented in data from the International Argo Ocean Float Array. The South is moving first. The sequence NPF 19 describes has a starting point, and that starting point is already in motion. Why the full translation has not been published. NPF 19 has not appeared in any peer-reviewed journal. The preliminary translation report, 47 pages, circulated among a small number of Assyriology departments in early 2023, was subsequently placed in restricted access classification by the Iraqi State Board of Antiquities. The official reason, per a correspondence Dr. Svensson noted in a newsletter item she later removed, was that the translation requires further specialist review. Standard practice. Tablets sit in restricted classification for years without comment. What is not standard is the accompanying instruction, that the preliminary report itself not be distributed beyond the original working group. That instruction was issued after the report had already circulated. It is retroactive containment applied to a document that had already left the building. Dr. Svensson's newsletter item, before its removal, noted that in 34 years of working with Mesopotamian texts, she had never seen that instruction applied to a document that had already been shared with a peer working group. 2 researchers who received the report before the restriction was issued have described its contents publicly in separate forms without apparent coordination. Their accounts match on every key point. 3 named regions, the sequence initiating in the south, and a final section of NPF 19, column 8, the last fully legible column, that the translation team described as the most unsettling portion of the document. Column 8 does not describe what happens during the shift. It does not describe the flooding or the shaking or the aftermath. It describes who placed the warning there and who they intended to receive it. The language in that column, per both researchers, addresses the recipient directly in the second person. Not future priests, not future kings, not the powerful. The Sumerian root used for the intended recipients is the same root that appears in the Enki texts when describing the me, the knowledge of how things work, as distinct from received belief or inherited instruction. The ones addressed in column 8 are described as those in whom understanding has already begun to move. Not the ones who were told, the ones who worked it out before being told. That distinction was important enough to the original author that they carved it into clay, sealed it in a container, and buried it under a floor to wait 5,000 years. 3 traditions, 1 sequence. NPF 19 is not the only ancient document that describes geographic consequences of a geomagnetic pole shift. The Vedic texts describe a period called the Pralaya, the dissolution between ages, as involving the flooding of the low coastal lands and the shaking of the island chains of the Eastern Ocean. The sequence matches what NPF 19 describes: the southern change first, then the western flooding, then the eastern shaking.
The Hopi oral tradition describes what it calls the end of the fourth world, the current world, as preceded by a warming of the waters, the shaking of lands that should be stable, and the flooding of lands that have never flooded in living memory. Less geographically precise than NPF 19, but the categories hold. The Egyptian pyramid texts, the corpus of religious writing from the tomb of Unas, among the oldest surviving written texts in the world, predating the New Kingdom by over 1,000 years, contain a phrase that translators render as the overturning of the great waters and the silencing of the cold wind from the south. The cold wind from the south, in the physical geography of the ancient Mediterranean, is the wind driven by the Antarctic circumpolar current. The silencing of it describes a disruption to exactly the system NPF 19 identifies as the first to fail. 3 traditions, 3 separate linguistic families, 3 continents of origin. The geographic sequences they describe point at the same regions and run in the same order. The current data is less comfortable than it would have been 30 years ago. AMOC is weakening. The West Antarctic Ice Sheet is losing mass faster than projected. The South Atlantic Anomaly is expanding and splitting. Swarm satellite data published in 2023 confirm the anomaly has developed a second lobe, positioned directly above the ocean between NPF 19's first and third named regions, the western coastal lands and the Great Southern Cold Anchor. The Sumerians did not have satellites, or oceanographic instruments, or paleomagnetic core samples. What they had was a record long enough, passed from observer to observer across enough generations, that the pattern became visible. They had watched something happen before, and they built the document to reach whoever would be there the next time. What the tablet leaves open. The clay of NPF 19 is sitting in a controlled environment at an institution whose name has not been publicly confirmed. The preliminary translation report is, by institutional instruction, not for distribution. What cannot be locked in a classification system is the geology. The paleomagnetic record showing the field weakening. Satellite data confirming the South Atlantic Anomaly splitting. AMOC measurements showing strength declining. Glaciological surveys showing Antarctic ice loss accelerating beyond every model prediction. All published, peer-reviewed, publicly available. NPF 19 left a specific warning. 3 regions. A sequence initiating in the south. A mechanism called the inversion of the deep anchor. The Sumerians built it into clay thick enough to outlast 5,000 years, sealed it in a ceramic container bonded with bitumen and calcite, and buried it beneath the floor of a structure in the city their own records describe as the oldest city, the place where the records of civilization first began. The document was placed to be found. Column 8 addresses whoever finds it in the second person, and describes them not by bloodline or geography or office, but by a state of understanding that it says will already have begun in those people before the anchor shifts. The 2 researchers who described that column publicly, separately, without coordination, agreed on one detail above all others. The column ends with a statement, not a question. It does not ask whether the named regions will survive. It does not ask whether the sequence can be stopped. It says, in a Sumerian construction that translates most directly as, the knowing is already in you. The anchor has begun to turn. What you do with the time that remains between now and the full inversion is not written here, because that part was never ours to write. 5,000 years of clay. 3 regions named. A sequence that started in the south. The south is already moving. Drop a comment. Tell me which of the 3 regions you think is already furthest into the sequence. South, west, or east.